Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. I'm going to pause that recording for just a second for the benefit of everybody who's watching Yes, I forgot to start the recording. So we are here to talk about audiobooks, and Mark Packard will be giving you the lowdown and the layout. Don't forget there's a Q&A box for those of you who are here live. Please use the Q&A box for questions so that they don't get lost in the chat, and you can enable the closed captions at the bottom if you want. And Mark, the show is yours.
Yay! Well, thank you, Alexa, for that wonderful introduction. I've known Alexa, I think, for probably 3 years now, since I started working with Michelle before I was even doing the audiobooks there. And so it's so exciting to be a part of the Women in Publishing webinar series this year. I see a lot of things in chat coming through already, which is awesome. And my guess is, let's see, 97 people here right now. I think I might even have worked with some of you, Toby Dorr, Judy Helm-Wright, and Linda Zazinski. I heard rumors you might be here today, and hello to everybody else as well. I'm going to go ahead and throw my email address in the chat box, and then number3productions.com, the URL there is, of course, my website where you can check some things out that I've done. But if you have any questions we don't get to today, please send me an email. The timing of this webinar is kind of funny because I'm taking 2 weeks off next week, but I will be around tomorrow to hopefully get to any questions we can't get to today. I do also have a PDF, not a workbook per se, nothing you need right now, but if you're interested in kind of an outline of what we went over, it also has a list of all the links and ways you can connect with me and with my parent company, GracePoint Publishing, who manages Empower Press with Michelle Vandepass. Just shoot me an email with just the subject outline in it, and I'll get that to you later today or tomorrow at the latest, just so you have some things for reference. I was telling Alexa I'm going rogue today, and we're not going to do any slides, so that way you can see my face, and even though I can't see yours, it's a little more front and center. And then we will also have, I'm going to try to save about 15 minutes at the end for a Q&A session. So definitely post them in the chat or write them down if you don't want to post them in the chat, and we can get to those all later today. So as Alexa mentioned, I've done a lot of audiobooks and podcasts. My background, just so you all know, is I started playing instruments when I was 8 or 9. So I've really been in the realm of audio in bands and producing music and producing lyrics and albums and podcasts and audiobooks for close to 30 years now. Not all in audiobooks, but I've been playing in audio my whole life. So it's very exciting to be able to work in the realm of audiobooks and podcasts and amplify voices out to the world. So we might run out of time, but these are my goals of things to get through today. I want to talk about consumers, audiobooks, and you, and why you need an audiobook as an author if you can make it happen. We'll go into some more stats, but audiobooks are definitely rising. It seems that with a little bit of variation for the most part, year over year, when you check the stats, we'll see that Kindle books, ebooks in general, and print books are continuously going down in consumption, while audiobooks are going up, especially when you compare the two statistics together. So having an audiobook is definitely a different thing to step into, but if you don't have one, it's a place you should try to get into if you can. We'll talk about that. I do also want to briefly go through some processes of how you can create an audiobook, whether doing it yourself or hiring somebody like Number3 Productions or anybody else out there to do the audiobook for you, and some fusion methods we can work with. I definitely do want to talk about, I think I saw at least one question already in the chat come out about AI in audiobooks. Little teaser, I just finished producing our first audiobook that fully used, except for the opening and closing credits, AI generated stock voices. And I'm actually really happy with how it came out. And there's definitely ups and downs, but we'll go over that too. Okay. I'm going to say one funny story. I kept looking over at my screen over here because I was waiting for a podcast to upload, and it did. So now I can close that out and try to focus on you all too. But I do have two screens, so you might see me looking to the left for a while as well. Okay, so let's talk about audiobooks, what they are, where they come from, where people get them, and some of the current market trends that we're seeing. So most of you, I assume, know what an audiobook is. It's just a read version of a written word at its most basic. What's interesting, though, I get asked this about podcasts a lot, is what is a podcast? Well, a podcast can be pretty much anything you want. You can break it down into technical specifics of what makes a podcast, or what makes an audiobook. But really, all an audiobook is just what we've been doing for the majority of human existence. It's just oral storytelling in some way or another. So, of course, there are some requirements. If you want to get onto Audible, which Audible you do through something called ACX, which is the Audiobook Creation Exchange. They are owned by Amazon. And if you go on there, there's some different ways you can go about it, but basically you'll have your book, your audiobook on Amazon, Audible, and on iTunes, Apple Audiobooks, if you will. To get onto ACX, you do have to have at least an ebook published. You actually don't have to have a print book at this current time, but you do have to have an ebook published because it will connect to your audiobook, which is great if you're an Amazon published author, if you have your book on Amazon, because it connects those two things together. The other distribution platform that I use the most, and is probably I would imagine the second most popular, is called Findaway Voices. And again, I should have all of these in that outline if you email me for it, or just email me if you have questions later on and forget some of these names. But Findaway Voices is owned by Spotify. Spotify's been in audiobooks pretty much since they started, but for a long time, it was just people basically uploading public domain narrated works, and they'd upload them as musical albums, essentially. About a year and a half ago, Spotify rolled out audiobooks to buy a la carte. And I want to say it wasn't even like 3 months ago. About 6 months ago, they started rolling them out for streaming downloads. So if you have a Spotify premium membership, you've got 15 hours of audiobook consumption a month. And they recently rolled that out. I think it was Australia and the UK, and it came to the US about 3 months ago. So that's been really interesting to watch as well. But Findaway Voices, which can get you on Audible and Amazon and iTunes, but also distributes to all the other places like audiobooks.com. It's the one that would allow somebody to request your audiobook in a library. It, of course, gets it on Spotify. So there's goes up and down a little bit, but normally around 40 different distribution partners that they have. But why I mention all of that is on Findaway Voices, you don't actually need to have a print book. You can just upload the audio. And that really leads into that audiobooks can be, like I said, just whatever you want them to be. The only real restrictions are the rules of the platform where you decide to distribute your audiobook. I've even seen people, I think it was a very creative idea of somebody who had written their book and didn't have the money to get it to the next stage. Maybe they needed some editing done, or they needed some help with the cover design, or they needed, whatever they needed, they didn't have the money for. So they actually ran a YouTube series where they would read a chapter of their book, and they were able to monetize the publication of their printed ebook through basically creating an audiobook on YouTube, which I thought was really creative. But so an audiobook can even be a YouTube video if you want it to be. Small thing here that I like to talk about is there is unabridged and abridged audiobooks that really is at the author's discretion, both in my opinion in terms of industry standards. If you do go onto Audible and you have your ebook, they look for what they say is a 96% match between the Kindle and the audiobook content, and they prefer unabridged. You can also get into, I believe a lot of people who come to women in publishing tend to be from the fiction side. So fiction is definitely a little bit of a different game to do an audiobook, or it can be, because you have your different character voices and such. I did have somebody tell me once, and I absolutely love this, is if you listen to the Hunger Games, I don't know if there's more than one version there, maybe, but the Hunger Games audiobook, it's just one narrator. It's not a multi-voice cast. It doesn't have sound effects. It's not a full production. And I was talking to a fiction author locally here, and she mentioned that if your writing is strong enough that your characters all have individual voices already because of how you've written them, you don't really need a multi-voice cast. It just is a little extra to do. So definitely something to consider, though. Full cast can get pricey. Voice actors are not normally cheap, especially not good ones. Most of them work for SAG-AFTRA. So they're part of a union. They follow union rules, which I'm in full support of. But it just is something to consider because of the price. You can also go on to two big places, the acx.com marketplace and the Findaway Voices marketplace. Normally, if you hire an author or a narrator and a producer from there, they're going to read it in their own voice. So most of them don't offer author narrated audiobooks. And that's the next option. You can narrate it yourself. You can learn how to produce it yourself too. I always say anybody can do a podcast, which is true because podcasts don't have technical requirements, but you could learn how to do an audiobook without too much trouble. It's just some basic audio engineering to get the technical requirements, and the rest is just the quality of the sound. Some places that people find audiobooks, Audible, of course, is still the number one. For a while, the stat I was seeing was 63% of the market is what they hold. I found one yesterday, though, that says it's 49%, which, if that's accurate, is very interesting to me because with Spotify entering the marketplace, I do have an instinctual feeling. I don't think it's been long enough to really see the numbers on it, but that they will start to take a lot of Audible's revenue share because they're kind of an all-in-one place for audio consumption, and they have video podcast as well, so they might start competing with YouTube also. Amazon is another place. It's interesting if you've ever tried to buy an audiobook on Amazon. It is an Audible audiobook. It's just a link on the page. Then, of course, Apple Audiobooks is a pretty big one as well. I personally, as an audiobook consumer, I do at this point because I do have a Spotify Premium. I tend to listen to most of my audiobooks on Spotify, but if my 15 hours runs out, I really like Chirp audiobooks. They tend to run a lot of great discounted prices. So it's great not only for a consumer, but if you're an author as well, because you can run some great promotions through Chirp audiobooks. And then another great one, a lot of people, it surprises me, aren't aware of this, but you can get a lot of wonderful audiobooks through your local library. There are still physical ones available. I think it's approximately 3% of audiobooks are still consumed on CD, so they're still holding on a little bit. But if you use Overdrive, Libby, or Hoopla, and you are a member of the library, it's not only a way you can consume audiobooks at a great price, but it's also a great way to support your favorite author or yourself. So if you have a book that's out there, if you have an audiobook or an ebook that's out there, check out your local library and see if they have it. If not, ask them if they can carry it, because you'll get a little bit of a royalty when they buy it, and then anyone can check it out while it's there. Okay, so that's some basic overview of how audiobooks work, and I do see the Q&A already filling up, which is awesome. I'm not going to look at those questions until we get to the end because I know I'll just start going down rabbit holes. That's one of my favorite things to do. So let's go into that's how the audiobook market kind of is looking right now. Before we move on, let me talk real quick about royalties on those platforms as well. So ACX and Spotify both use a pooled model. Now it can get a little bit. Thanks, Alexa, fellow rabbit hole jumpers. Yeah, I hang out with a lot of rabbits. They're real smart creatures. So Audible, you can buy a la carte audiobooks. I don't know the exact number, but the vast majority of audiobooks on Audible are bought through the membership, which I believe the standard price for an Audible membership is like $15. You get one free download a month of anything that's in their library, and then you can purchase additional a la carte downloads. You also get access to like the Audible Plus library. It's something like that, which I don't really look into that much, but it's just a bunch of free audiobooks you can get on there. There's a similar thing with Kindle as well. So the vast majority get it from there. There are a few people to get a la carte, but it's mostly a pooled service. And ACX has what they call an allocation factor. And the example they give is something along the lines of, if you have a $30 book that's selling, or you have a book that's selling at $30, somebody buys it, it gets multiplied by the allocation factor, they pay you $6. Which, and this is a little soapboxy, but it's interesting because they say they pay authors 40% royalties, and I'm pretty sure that 40% of 30 is $12, not $6. So all that to say is, when you start, oh, and I'm seeing a lot of requests coming in for chat to email the presentation out. If you could, I'm going to put my email in there again, just because I don't want to miss anybody. If you could just send me an email to mark@number3productions.com, and I check my spam folder all the time, so if it goes to spam, I'll still see it. I'll make sure to get a copy of it to you, just because there's a lot of chat and I don't want to miss anybody. But back to royalties. So essentially, when you see what a royalty is paid to you as an author, even if you're not going through a publishing company and you're a self-published author, take that royalty with a grain of salt. Our audiobooks that we sell through Audible, if you buy them a la carte, are around $15 to $20 in price for most of them. I will also tell you that our average royalty return per audiobook sold is $3.23. So again, not quite the 40%, or even closer to the 25% that they offer as well. A Spotify, same thing if it's a premium user who's streaming the audiobook. However, Spotify, though, if somebody buys your audiobook a la carte, they actually pay a flat 50% royalty rate, which is really, really good. Pretty much unheard of in any arts distributor I've ever seen or worked with, including Spotify for musicians. So, and I have seen it come through. I've checked the reports. If we sell it for $10, somebody buys it for $10, we get 5, Spotify gets 5. So really equitable model. And as a personal thing, I kind of hope that Spotify does start taking over Audible. While they're still a giant corporation who maybe we have to work with sometimes with some of their nuances, they do seem to be much more equitable to creators than a place like Audible. Okay, so we can probably talk about royalties a little bit more later on if we want to. Most of the other platforms are going to have similar things. They're going to have a pool-based royalty and a la carte where you'll make, $3 to $5 per audiobook sale, depending on the platform, depending on the pricing. This is going to be the one time I want to share my screen today, though. So there's a company that some of you all may have heard of called Edison Research, and I absolutely love Edison Research. They did a presentation at a podcast conference I was fortunate enough to be at last year in Denver, and they're really, really interesting. So this is kind of going into why do you as an author need an audiobook? Some of this might be repetition because I think at this point, especially since the surge of audio consumption we saw in 2020, most people are aware that as an author, an audiobook is becoming more and more necessary to have to make sure you're capturing all of your audience. So these are just some overall stats in terms of how people consume audio. We can see it's interesting to me that smartphone ownership actually dropped. Let's see, percent owning a smartphone by 1% from 2023 to 2024. So not a huge difference, but it is interesting that it saw a drop there. But we have 72% of people in the US population over 12 owning a smart TV. There's 90% that own a smartphone, and I would imagine it's probably a little more than that, but I could be wrong. Smart speakers, I find this one interesting, are going down to things like Alexa and Google Home are becoming less popular, which makes sense to me. I could definitely see that going down because I know for me, I don't really use a smart speaker because I just have my phone connected to my stereo. So I just use Siri on my stereo. People listening to the smart speaker is pretty low as well. We're smart speakers. Okay, we can kind of go through that. Is this another thing, just something to keep in mind when you think about audiobooks and sources ever used in the car? Radio is actually still up there, but then you start going online audio, podcast, CDs, and down from there. Podcast listening is up. While this isn't a podcast webinar, of course, following podcast trends, I think is very important if you are doing anything in the world of audio. Because people seem to be, both from what I've heard and what I observe on my own, moving from paid entertainment as much. So people are, we had the cut the cord where people stopped using cable, but then we saw the streaming services start to pick up and basically become a la carte cable services. So we're still all paying for a lot of the TV consumption that we consume, a lot of the TV consumption. We're seeing a trend in free listening, like podcasts going up, or audiobooks, which now not free, are still can be a really good deal. You can get, Chirp runs dollar audiobook sales all the time. So same cost as Netflix, you got 15 audiobooks you can listen to a month, an average of 10 hours, 150 hours of entertainment. So, but we can see podcast listening is going up. There's one more thing I think I wanted to look at here. I might have scrolled past it, but basically we're also seeing, because for a while the trends in podcast and audio consumption was going up amongst about the teenagers to 45, 50. And now we're actually seeing a big increase in both children listening to audiobooks, which implies that they're listening based on their pandemic and their 2020 habits. They're continuing that habit of listening to audiobooks and podcasts. And we're also seeing the generation above 50, the ages above 50, they're having an uptick in audio consumption as well. So what that really shows is, as a whole, our whole society is moving to a lot of audio consumption. You can see huge spikes here. I mean, it starts in 2000, 5% listen to audio. Now we're up to 76% listening to audio online, which is really crazy. Oh, this is where I just wasn't quite there. So we're seeing age 55 plus, and it's been about the same since 2022. but it's still over 50%. Definitely 12 to 34 and 35 to 54 as well are really high up there. Online audio listening is going up a lot. Online audio brand awareness is going up. Now, this doesn't have to do with, this doesn't list any audiobook platforms, unfortunately, but it does show that it's going up. And I think, and this is the last one, audiobook listening in the last year. So it is interesting. We did see a nice uptick here during 2020, and it did drop in 2022, but we're back up to 38% of the US population over 12 listened to an audiobook in the last year. To kind of contrast, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. But the last statistic I saw from Amazon on, I believe it's 4.9% of self-published authors on Amazon have an audiobook. And then we got 38% of the population listening to audiobooks. So just another thing of, if you're an author, an audiobook's a great thing to have. Let's see, we talked a little bit about economic struggles, and then let's talk a little bit more about, other than just the obvious of, if you want to stay in the market that's happening right now, having an audiobook is something you can't really afford to miss out on at this point. And we're also at a point, I think, where we're seeing a big tipping point. Shout out to Malcolm Gladwell. I just listened to that audiobook again, which is phenomenal. But we're seeing a tipping point right now where the market still has a lot of room to get into, but I don't have stats necessarily to back this up. This is just from watching and observing that we're going to start to see an oversaturation of the market here pretty soon. It's what we saw with Spotify and with online streaming when it went from Napster to Spotify audio consumption. We saw a big oversaturation of the market with artists, and now it has kind of mellowed out, where instead of having a few artists who have just the biggest sales, those sales have kind of trickled down, I guess you could say, to the lower people as well. But all that to say that now is still a really good time to get into audiobooks because it's becoming more and more popular. If you get in now, the market's not oversaturated yet, as it is with a lot of other things. So obviously revenue opportunities are a reason to need an audiobook. Another big reason is to expand your audience reach. And we think, or at least I think a lot of people think in this way, is when you're thinking of expanding your your author reach, you might just think of trying to hit like a different generation, a different demographic. But we tend to think of that in terms of age or maybe gender identity or things of that nature of people we're trying to hit. But another really important part of audiobooks is it also expands your reach and your voice. If we take away the money from it, just getting your voice out there to people who aren't able to consume print or ebooks, and for a variety of reasons, people who can't see, people with Parkinson's who have trouble holding a book. My son is 5. He can't read, but he can listen to audio. So it just expands it to a lot of places. And then on what I think is a bigger note for that accessibility is knowledge is power. And the more we're able to get that knowledge out to people, the more we have an equitable and just society. So it's really important for that as well. It also, of course, does build your author brand. So, if you go on Amazon, we'll keep using Amazon because they have, I don't know the percentage, but so much of the market. You go on there, and if you just have an ebook, you see an ebook. If maybe you have a print book, paperback or hardback, but then you can also see, if you have an Audible audiobook, it's on there as well. And just from an energetic place, if an organic person, I know for myself, if I'm looking for an organic author, I just know subconsciously I tend to think a little bit higher of somebody who has an audiobook as well. Not that I think their content's necessarily better, but like, oh, they have one more place out there for me to consume their work. And this is one that I do think gets overlooked a lot. So it does depend on your distribution agreement, how you can use your audiobook. For example, on ACX, the Audible distribution company, you can go exclusive or non-exclusive with them. If you go exclusive, you always keep the copyright to your audio, the production rights to your audio and all that, but you give up the distribution rights. And then they have not super strict, but you have to be very careful about which pieces of the book you're allowed to share. I believe it's 10% or 10 minutes, whichever is more of the content you're allowed to share for promotion. However, if you have, let's say, a 50,000 word audiobook, which is going to be around 5 hours, probably 4.5 hours, we'll say. That's 4.5 hours of recorded audio that you can put into your social media promotions or your YouTube promotions or wherever you're trying to promote yourself, that you just have now. You have all this amazing audio content that you can use to advertise your book and your brand. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's in it for the consumer, which I kind of jumped ahead there. Talking for sure about accessibilities, like again, personally on an energetic level, I think that's the most important. But there's some other things in there as well, possibly a lower price. And at least there's more room for, I would say, lowering the price because it only involves digital assets. As I said, it's very, very rare to have an audiobook on CD anymore. And I just like on cassette tapes and records, even though they made a resurgence of went away to the CD might go away too. It wouldn't surprise me at all. So you can adjust the price because the only price is the hosting price and the platform price. You don't have the printed price like you would of a book or a CD. Another great thing, and this is how I tend to consume audiobooks. I don't do very well sitting still. I fidget a lot and like to move around a lot. So it really helps my learning and my entertainment to be able to listen to something while I'm playing a video game or doing chores or whatever. So it kind of allows me to double hit that. And of course, things with commutes, walks, and the exercise. And then I think these are two other interesting, really cool points that are in there for the consumers. One is a connection with the author. So if you're reading your audiobook, and I am very supportive, I always people ask me like, should I hire a narrator? I'm like, well, you can. For a fiction book, I'd recommend it more than a nonfiction book for sure, because you want to have if you're not a voice actor, it's good to have that skill set behind it. But having your own voice on there, like I know, Brene Brown is a wonderful author and has some really great audiobooks, but I would be less inclined to listen to her audiobooks if somebody else read them. I'm doing an audiobook right now for somebody named Karen Curry Parker. Some of you might have heard her. She was a co-founder of Grace Point Publishing as well. But she has an audiobook out right now that's from her first book from 2012 that was read by a not by her, and we're working on one right now that is read by her, and you can just feel the difference because it's in first person, and having somebody else read Karen's voice, it does sound a little bit off. And then if it is a full production for like a fiction book with sound effects and music and different voices, it's as immersive as watching an adaptation. I would personally say more immersive than watching the film version of a book. Okay, so we're going along pretty well. I'm going to try to take about 5 minutes to talk about kind of the audio, what I call the audiobooks journey from the voice to your ears, and then I'll take about 10 minutes to talk about the AI and my experiences with AI audiobooks, and then we'll open up for some Q&A. Okay, so the audiobooks journey from the voice to your ears. Audiobook production, just like anything, can go any direction the producer you want to take, but these are kind of the standard ways you'll see it go through. So you'll start off with your pre-production phase, where yourself, and I'm going to assume that you as an author are being involved in this for the most part. You'll either audition narrators, you could go on Fiverr, you could go on the ACX or Find a Way Voices Marketplace where you find them. And they'll have samples and list of their audiobooks out there that they've done, and you can look through that. Or you might decide to self-narrate, and that's great as well. If you decide to self-narrate, you'll need to set up an in-person recording space of some sort, and then depending on if you're recording it yourself or somebody else recording it, an online recording space as well. Like, for example, if you work with me as a producer, I use StreamYard, and I'll get you set up on there. We'll go on to StreamYard, very similar to Zoom. Just an online recording platform that's more designed for recording than streaming, though. And we'll record it on there. Another really important thing that I like to do, and I do a fusion of this, you can do it in the moment, you can do it beforehand, or you can do both. I do both. But go through your manuscript and find anything that doesn't really fit for an audiobook. The example I like to give is using the word read versus listen. A lot of our authors will have an opening section called something like a note to the reader, and I'll change that to a note to the listener. They're just little things, but I do think they make a big difference in the final consumption by the purchaser. And there'll be other things you might find as well as you go through and have to change in the moment, especially for nonfiction authors. But for fiction authors who might have maybe, I don't know, a map of the place you're in, or extra character biographies with images of the characters, you'll want to go through and check for the graphics or charts, because it's sometimes pretty hard. And I wouldn't recommend reading, if you're writing a business book, maybe the spreadsheet off in your book. You just want to mention it. So every platform that I use allows you to include a supplemental PDF. Or another thing that we'll do is we'll create a PDF to go with the audiobook, or we'll recommend that the author takes all the information that would go into the PDF and put it on their website, and then just use that as their call to action. So while they're reading, they could say something like, I'm about to refer to a graphic from the print version of this book. Please go to my website, So you can download this. So it's another way to drive traffic to your website. And then also, you'll want to decide what you want to read from. I do know a lot of people like to read from the physical book, and I love reading physical books too because of the feel behind it and energy that it gives. However, when reading an audiobook, the best option I found is to use an iPad or a similar sized tablet and just read from there. And the reason for that is because if you're reading from a book, the turning noise of the page tends to come through. If the noise of a turning page comes through while you're speaking, it's very difficult. Can be very difficult to get out in the production. Okay, so that's our pre-production stage. Then we would go into our recording process. You do want to have a quiet space. I don't feel you need a studio. Really, what you need is a good microphone. And yeah, if you send me an email and want to know about microphones, let me know and I'll send you a list. But I don't want to go through that in detail because we might not finish the presentation on time. But having a good microphone is definitely, I'd say, more important than your recording space because there are so many microphones right now that are designed for things like podcasting, audiobook recording versus music. So they're really good at working with maybe voices that aren't quite as trained as a musician might be. While you're recording, a really important thing is you need to keep track of the stumbles and any cuts you want to make. If you have a producer working with you, somebody supervising your recording, they should hopefully do that for you, or they'll at least cut it out in the post-production stage and the editing stage. What I like to do is I go through it with a PDF of the file, or if I have to, a Kindle version of the book, and I just highlight and make notes as I go. So that way, when the narrator stumbles, which trust me, everybody's going to stumble many, many times throughout it. My average amount of edits for an audiobook is around 350 of stumbles, and I've worked with many different authors, so it's going to happen to you. So just to hold that in, if you haven't done an audiobook yet, and you start reading and you start stumbling, just you're joining the crowd. So moving on to editing and production, that's a place where you would need to do a little bit of learning. There are some technical standards. Mainly that has to do with the quality, like you don't want to have external noises or door slams or anything that might come through in the recording process. Right now I have somebody outside working on my lawn that might be coming through. We don't want that in there. Of course, you do need to reduce all any stumbles or any errors that happen during the production. And then you do have volume standards you need to hit as well, which aren't difficult to hit, but you do normally need a little bit of knowledge and some form of an editing and recording software in order to get to that place. If you do decide to do it yourself, there are a ton of resources out there. And honestly, that's how I learned pretty much everything I did about production. I like to say I made a lot of really bad songs and a few really bad audiobooks and podcasts, not quite as bad as the songs. And then I really learned by watching a lot of YouTube videos and reading a lot early on. And I still do that when I'm trying to figure something out. And then we go into distribution, which we kind of talked about a little bit, but I'll briefly recap that. ACX, Audiobook Creation Exchange, acx.com. They are owned by Amazon, and they do Amazon, Audible, and Apple. So those are only three places they'll distribute to if you go to there. If you go exclusive with them, like I said, they own the distribution rights, you own everything else. You can, and this is our normal strategy actually, since Audible still owns most of the audiobook market, we'll go exclusive, and then after 91 days, you can email them to switch to non-exclusive. You can't switch back, but that's what we try to do to capture the sales on Audible in the beginning, and then try to get a wider reach for the rest of the audiobook's lifespan. Let's see. Find Away Voices, like I said, it goes pretty much everywhere else, 40 outside of ACX. You can distribute to Amazon, Audible, and Apple. This is just a little tip, though. It takes me about an hour to get things set up for distribution on Find Away Voices, about 30 minutes on Audible after doing a few of them. So maybe double that if it's your first time doing it. So 3 hours total. If you're going to go through both of them, I would recommend, or if you're going to go on Find Away Voices and go non-exclusive with Audible, I would recommend uploading to Find Away Voices and Audible still. And that's because if you upload to Find Away Voices and they distribute Audible, they take an additional cut off of Audible's cut. So it's not a huge difference. I mean, honestly, it might even just be like 20 cents a copy. But for the extra hour, I prefer to upload to both platforms and get the highest royalties possible for us and our authors. And then they also They also do both push to Apple Audiobooks, which is funny because sometimes you might see an audiobook appear on there twice of something that we've done or someone else has done. And then finally, and this is something that I do think isn't talked about as much, is if you keep the distribution rights. So if you have non-exclusive agreements, you can distribute through your website. One of the more memorable ones I saw of this, and this was an older audiobook, but I bought it and it gave me a link to a private SoundCloud stream, which SoundCloud is still really popular, but mainly for underground hip hop fans, not really for audiobooks. But there's other places up there, like Book Funnel is where we host our audiobooks. And there's also something called Bandcamp, which I really, really like. You can upload, it's for music, mainly underground indie music. When there's different things to it, but it's free to use. Pretty much any place like that will probably take a small cut of what you sell it for. But if you sell it for $10, you're probably going to pay them $1 at the most. You're keeping $9 of the revenue. So that's basic overview of audiobook from your ears to your iPhone or whatever you consume them on. So I'm going to go through a little bit about some of my big thoughts in AI, and then we'll get into the Q&A. Some of you may have seen this, I believe, happened in November of 2023. KDP has rolled out AI production in beta. I checked yesterday, it's still in beta. There haven't been any updates on how they're going to pursue it since November that I've personally seen. But as I mentioned earlier, according to that release article, only about 4% of self-published authors on Amazon have audiobooks. They will pay 40% royalties to you. They do also say the same thing on their explanation as the ACX allocation factor, as they call it. So I've only played with this with one book that it hasn't sold any copies because we were just testing it. But my guess is that you'll probably get about $3 per unit sold out. It seems to be about the same. One really cool side note is you actually can set the price. So on Audible, you can't set the price. They set it for you. We have no control over it. And then on Findaway Voices, you can set the price, but the platform can adjust it. They'll still pay you royalties on your price, but they can adjust it. On this AI for KDP, you can set the prices between $3.99 and $14.99 US, which is kind of cool. So you have some control over that. When it's published, it will be labeled as it was created with a virtual voice. From my experiment that I did with it 2 or 3 weeks ago, there were 8 different voice options. I think it was 3 male voices, 3 female voices, and then 1 male, 1 female UK accent voices. You don't have a whole lot of control over any editing in it. You can change the speed to 25% or 50% faster, slower. I would imagine down to the word level. You can also change, because it is an AI voice, there are ways to change the way it's pronouncing something. One thing that I found in the last book we did was read versus read, where it would pronounce it incorrectly. So I had to keep an eye out for that. And then from what I saw, you can't really change what's in the audiobook. From what I could gather, they do take the ebook and then they leave out all the front matter and all the back matter. So I know for the one that I did, there was an introduction or a dedication. There was something early on that was left off, and the about the author at the end was also left out, and there wasn't a way to add that back in. So you don't have much control over the content of the book, and you also can't go in and start changing the content. Like I said, I changed read to listen. You can't go in and change that. It is interesting. It will be on Audible, although Audible says it only accepts human voices. So that's kind of interesting. There will be an AI book on Audible, but if you go through ACX, you can't use AI voices. If you decide you want to do a full production book, you can take it down from KDP and then upload different files to Audible. But you can't download, like once it creates the AI audiobook, you can't download those files. They're owned by Amazon. You don't get to keep them. And it's hard even through ACX to try to do a release of an audiobook and an ebook at the same time. It is possible, but there's some logistics you got to go through. However, for the KDP one, they won't let you create the audiobook with the AI voices until the ebook is live. So if you're trying to launch your ebook or your print book or your ebook and print book at the same time as an audiobook, you can't do it currently in the KDP beta program. And then just kind of, I guess, my thoughts on where we're going. So I'll let you know. I don't want to say the name of it. I'll let it be a surprise. But like I said, I did just recently produce our first fully voiced AI audiobook. It had 2 voices in it. It's about 55,000 words. For the experiment, it actually took me longer to produce than it would have working with voice actors, and a lot of that had to do with the going in and just adjusting pronunciation of a lot of different words. However, at the same time, it still cost the author less. I was able to give them a discount because they were kind of our trial person. But then if they had read the whole thing themselves, or if we had hired two voice actors, so back to the accessibility, it did really help us cut down the cost. That was a 2-voice audiobook. I'll be doing a 5-voice AI audiobook in the next couple of months. And my prediction is that adding those 3 more voices really isn't going to add time to it. So that's kind of a cool thing, is if you're trying to do a multi-voice production, it seems that over 2 voices, it doesn't change too much depending on how many more voices you're adding. And the author was very happy with the result, as she was able to have the 2 voices, and it was a conversational book, which was very important to her for production, but she didn't have the funds to hire 2 full-time voice actors, which would have probably cost her 2 or 3 times as much as she paid us. And just kind of my thoughts on where we're going with AI, because that's the big buzzword. I know there was at least one webinar with women in publishing that talked about AI and books. AI generated content, I think the positive, it's great for the spread of knowledge and accessibility. It breaks down a lot of barriers of entry to the market. So you could produce an AI audiobook with you need a lot less technical knowledge than you would to produce one that you're reading yourself. I also do think it already has for us, and it will continue to lower production prices, which is great for consumers and authors, or at least hopefully will be. With listens, at least to the downfalls, is like all tech, it can be manipulated, misused, used for negative purposes. So I think we just need to outweigh the positives from the negatives as creators. And there's been a couple of things that seem to have been cleared up, but some of you may have heard over the last couple of years, there were a lot of big lawsuits against Google and Spotify and Findaway Voices because they were using narrative voices to train their AI models. As far as I know, they never actually cloned an author's voice. It was like they were training their AI models with thousands, tens of thousands of authors' voices. But of course, the concern with that is none of those narrators were compensated. So they have, I believe Google did have to pay a pretty heavy settlement. Spotify came immediately removed. They had that clause. It was, honestly, in my opinion, very sneakily hidden. It was the last clause in Article 16 at the very end of their distribution agreement. I didn't catch it, and I read those pretty clearly for authors. But that's gone. So, but that happened. And there's also a lot of talk about the unethical ways that companies are training their AI in terms of how they're paying the labor of people that are working on it. So there's a lot to go into it for sure. I could see narrators moving into more of a producer and director role as they use their AI voices. They might find a market to sell their own cloned voices. And I guess, yeah, before we go to Q&A, because I got to wrap myself up, the 3 places that I'm kind of approaching with myself as a producer within a book publishing company is we will start offering, if authors want to, we'll just start off adding on to our publishing packages, whatever the cost ends up being for our time to upload a Kindle book as an AI audiobook. We're not pushing that. We've come to agreement as a company that the market's not ready for that. At least not for what we can do, because it's not the quality we want our audiobooks to be. Second option is what I did with this last audiobooks. We either clone the author's voice, or we pick some stock voices and we create the audiobook that way. Downfall is that Audible says they won't accept AI voices, as I mentioned, but I will let you know that the AI voice book I did actually get accepted. So I don't know if that'll happen with all of them. And also, I think because of the Kindle AI voices they're rolling out, they'll start accepting AI voices. And then my third option is we continue to offer a higher cost producing. It won't be higher cost in terms of I'm raising my prices, but it will be higher compared to an AI audiobook production for fully authored narrated books, as we've done for every book except for this AI one. And my guess is those prices, the future that we'll see is, if we continue to see the prevalence of AI voices, prices for author narrated audiobooks probably will go up as AI voices become more prevalent. So, okay, cool. I see 13 questions in the Q&A. So let me go through these real quick. Do you want I see you hopping on too, Alexa?
Yeah, would you like some help managing this piece?
That would be wonderful. That's
And
great.
I
I
won't.
was looking at my outline.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening here. If we don't get through all these questions, you've got his email address. You can go in there. I want to just follow up. That was, first of all, what a phenomenal overview of all the things. I mean, you really hit on some new changes and different things to consider, and the AI obviously is a big one. But just exceptional overview of everything happening. That I did get accepted into the KDP beta program and jumped on it right away because I was very, very curious. And for those of you who know me, I love to try things and share them with our community. So I'm going to share the YouTube link for not now, for after this video, and I'll put it in the notes when we send it out later too. Where I filmed myself as I went through the process of taking my ebook and making it an audiobook. And then you can see what the sales page looks like on KDP. But your points were right on target with that. Like, there's pros and there's cons. Obviously, the biggest pro is for someone who can't afford to hire someone to do the production of their book. It's a great thing. But the cons, like you said, about the pronunciation and all that kind of stuff, there's definitely is a work in progress, but I think it's really interesting, and I'm very glad that you addressed it, because I think it's people people need to be aware of what's happening and how to do it. So thank you. All right, lots
Yeah.
of questions here. So
Alexa, can I say one more thing real quick before we go? And this is what happens to me. This is why I'm glad I don't actually run the business. I work for it. I forget to talk about like the services I offer. I'm
please.
just gonna post in the chat real quick. So I am running just a few specials for. I like to do things based on three because we're number three productions. So I have three specials for attendees today. One is we have a podcast course that we're offering for $33 for the next 2 weeks. And we do a $333 down payment to book a recording slot, and we're offering a $3,333 production package for up to 50,000 words. So I'm just going to put that in chat, as booking calendars and emails and all of that, if you're interested in working with us. So just let me know. And then I posted Michelle's calendar in there too, since like I said, I'm going to be out for 2 weeks, not planned intentionally, but if you need to talk to somebody sooner, I want to put that there too. And that's my call to action. That's where I'm going to stop.
Wonderful. Okay. In terms of, we're going to skip questions on technical aspects, equipment, all of that kind of stuff. You said you could answer that. Is any of that on your website that we can go send people to, or
On the website, no, but I will post two real quick. I've got it on here somewhere. Just links to the Find a Way Voices and the ACX articles on what they require. And then those will help lead you to some more resources, or I do have some basic information I can share as well,
okay, great,
if you email me.
as well? Wonderful. So yeah, we could have a whole long conversation about that. I don't want to eat. Okay, I believe in your presentation, you definitely talked about the difference between several actors, single actors, all of that. But the question is, if there was a full audio production with several actors, sound effects, blah, 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 about how much, and of course, this is based on word count, so I don't know, maybe pick a word count, and production hours to give an estimate of cost?
So for that one, I actually don't have a good answer. That is one of my big goals as somebody whose background is in music and in theater and dance and production and woo la la la, all those wonderful flourishing things. I have not had the opportunity to actually pursue a full production yet. It definitely does add up, and a lot of it is going to be really subjective. Like if we're talking, you want to add a theme song to the beginning and end of each chapter with 2 voice actors, that's one thing. If we're talking hiring 10 voice actors, which requires either a big studio or 10 different remote recording sessions and sound effects and all of that, I mean, that's going to double, triple, quadruple the price there. So, but my apologies, I don't have a solid answer on that one.
Well, and that's okay, because it varies from company to company. I mean, I've heard a large spectrum, and again, depending on the number of actors that you use, the number of all the other things. I think we had someone on here a few years ago who said you can estimate somewhere between $200 to $300 per finished hour, and most novels are going to run anywhere between 9 to 20 hours. So,
Mm-hmm.
you can give kind of figure out a ballpark there, but yeah, it's not inexpensive, especially if you have multiple people's voices.
Oh, I like that. I just saw, Sarah, you get your voice actor from local community theater, which is really cool. If I may, I will give just a quick thought on prices in general. So you're right on, Alexa, with the 200 to 300. What I've seen a little more recently for, I mean, I've seen people say they charge $5 per finished hour. Don't hire those people. Don't do that one. Yeah, it's not good. But I tend to see for more quality productions between 250 and 500 per finished hour. Our production costs tend to run around 400 to 450 per finished hour. We are a little bit on the higher end. I'd like to say we produce high-end audio too. You'll also, when you're estimating it, the average person speaks, we use 9,000 to 9,300 words equals one finished hour. And then you can estimate for recording time. I like to give the estimate of every 9,000 words, we're going to do 2 hours of recording.
Yeah. Okay, great. It's an investment, and you just have to go into it knowing that it's an investment. Okay. If adding music to an audiobook, does one have to pay for the royalties for permission to use it?
100%. I mean, that depends on what it is. So I'll say kind of a step above that. ACX, and it's a thing where you can get through their filters. I don't think they really monitor as closely as they say they do, but they recommend against using music in audiobooks. It's also not really used as much except for in fiction audiobooks. I was listening to one from 10 years ago that had music in it. It felt very dated to me. The music didn't add anything to it. It really did. And it was a Malcolm Gladwell book, and I was like, I could have mixed this better, Malcolm. Give me a call sometime. Uh, but then also, I'm sure he'll see this. He's probably here right now in the background.
Well, probably.
He just,
Oh my gosh.
but the royalties, yes, and it does depend. There's royalty-free music out there, but always just be careful because it might say royalty free and it's not, but most places there's tons of places out there where you'll pay a flat fee or an a la carte fee and you download it and you don't get the rights to sell it yourself is normally the caveat. You can't go out and sell that music, but you get the rights to use it however you want, no royalties paid at the production. So they're easy to find.
We've got a lot of real not technical, a lot of real specific questions about different companies and what they do. So I'm going to go through these, but if you don't know the answer or it's out, whatever, then we'll just pass. So this is a pretty easy one. ACX, upload your own audio. Do they require to use their service for recording?
So they actually don't have a recording service as far as I'm sure they do, like for big name authors, they probably have studios. But it's very similar to a gig economy thing. So the people who you find in the ACX marketplace are independent contractors. So you do upload it through the ACX website, but you don't record anything on there. You do all the recording. They don't have editing or production tools. They're just a distributor.
Okay. This is an interesting question. I hadn't heard this. Is it true that authors get no royalty for audiobooks purchased with Audible credits?
To get a solid answer, I'd have to call up our good friend Jeff Bezos about that one. Because that's the thing. If you start trying to look on ACX official statements on royalties, in my opinion, it's pretty ambiguous. I have a degree in math and I can't figure out their percentages because I think they're intentionally ambiguous. I don't believe that's true. It seems to be part of their allocation factor that even if somebody, you sign up for the free trial, you get the audiobook from my through the grapevine knowledge, the author still gets paid something, although I would assume it's far, far less, but I don't 100% know.
Yeah, I would guess, and this is a total guess because I'm brand new into the audiobooks with this one, but I would guess that the books on Audible credits probably fall similar to books that are on KU, where they have a pot of money that from those subscriptions, and then the people get like a percentage based on all those numbers factored into it. So yeah, it's not the same as a sale that has a very clear royalty. It's going to be based on a percentage of the pot for that month, would be my guess.
And I'm going to re-answer that because I just realized I kind of heard that. I thought the question was about people who get free Audible trials. If somebody does use an Audible credit, like you're paying $15 a month and you use your credit for that month, the author does get paid for that. Now, I still don't know exactly how much, but yes, they do get paid for that. So that's not true for everything I know.
Okay. What are typical ways to pay? Great question. To pay voice actors, is it best with an indie author to pay a flat rate or a royalty percentage? And how much can I anticipate in terms of flat rates?
The best way to get the current flat rates is to do what is it, SAG-AFTRA, which is the union and involves voice actors. They have a huge list of standard for paying the acting and the production and the editing. What I've seen is most voice actors, the last one I spoke to, for example, was really good, charges $250 per finished hour, but that's just for the narration. They also offer production and such, but that's a separate cost. So 250 for a decent voice actor per finished hour is probably a good starting place, depending on the quality you want. And then in terms of flat rate or royalty percentage, I'm kind of against as a producer. This is personal, but doing royalty percentage shares. I don't think it's a fair model because you never know what the book's going to do. I do think a fusion model of paying a combination of a flat rate and a royalty share is good. But for the most part, pure royalty share doesn't seem to work out that well for the author or for the producer.
Yeah. Okay. If you've got a book that was done years ago, on CD, can you update, or do you just start over? Can you take the CD and somehow, how do you work that one?
There would be two ways I would recommend going. That one would be if you don't like how it sounded, of course, start over. So it's kind of a subjective answer. If somebody came to me and wanted me to produce it, I would recommend they give me the CDs. I'd listen to it, and we could either just adjust it to the technical qualities, make sure it hits like the loudness levels and stuff that ACX requires. Or depending on the quality level, it wouldn't be too difficult to basically remaster it and take it and clean up the audio and make it sound a little bit better as well, which of course would be cheaper than re-recording the whole thing because it's already recorded.
Absolutely. Okay. So if you are doing your own audiobook, do you have any advice on someone who is a female author but has a male protagonist? So most women who are women reading have female protagonists to her knowledge. Do you ever see this where the gender of the reader doesn't match the main character?
I do sometimes for sure. I think the example I could give is not necessarily a gender mismatch, but when I was talking about Karen's audiobook, where it was read in Karen's first person voice, but by a different person, it didn't work so well. So, again, a lot of things, and that's because this is a creative world, right? These answers are subjective. I think as we are moving into more of a global understanding of gender identity and gender spectrum and such, it probably won't matter as much to a lot of people. But there's also something to be said with maybe if we even just don't talk about the gender of it, but if you want the voice to match the character is what's important. So you might be able to find a male actor with a higher pitched voice that you think it works, or a female actor that it works with. But I'd say you just got to kind of start listening to what people are doing.
I was thinking about this the other day too. When I think about when I first started listening to audiobooks way back in the day, it seems like it was almost always a single voice person who would make her voice deeper for the males, or raise it up for the little children or whatever. But it was like one person, and we didn't care. We wanted to hear the
Right.
story. It was like someone reading you a story, you know? So I think sometimes we get caught up in things that stop us from moving forward that we don't, you
Right.
know.
I think
Okay,
is very true.
we have time for one more question. So I am scrolling through here to see the best one in here. This is a good one because it's specific to your company. How much time does it take for a 6-hour audiobook to be made with your production company? Weeks, a month? How long?
Oh man, I thought I could have an objective, but that's subjective too. It just depends a lot on the production schedule. So right now, to personally work with me, I'm booked out through the end of July. If I work with somebody who wants to do it sooner, I can hire contractors and stuff. But right now, I'm normally 3 to 4 months out on my booking schedule. From start to finish, in terms of hours, it takes me 6 to 7 hours, including recording time, per finished audiobook. So I don't remember what the number was there, but most of our audiobooks are around 50,000 words. So we'll say that's 5 hours. So I'm going to be taking 35 to 40 hours total just to produce the audiobook and upload it. If we're doing a launch or anything, that of course adds to it. So if it works out, I could get it done in a week, but most of our audiobooks take from recording time to distribution 3 to 4 months.
Good to know. Okay, so we will have this recording up on our YouTube channel. So if you're not following youtube.com/write publish sell, that's where it will go. I will drop the links to all of these things, to the discounts, et cetera, in the show notes. So please check that out. Thank you so much, Mark. There were a lot
Yes,
of,
thank you.
yeah, and thank you for your continued support and for Grace Point and number 3 productions and all of the support. We've got the email address for Mark. I will not put that on the the YouTube channel so that you don't have everybody emailing you, but we will send that out with the replay of this as well. So just if you have questions that you couldn't get answered, I would also encourage you to go to Google or go to ACX or go to Find a Way. There's a lot of companies out there that have blogs that are probably writing a lot of this content if you have more specific questions that you just can't wait to get the answer from for until Mark gets back from vacation, but or travel. Okay.
Yes, and I got 3 hours booked tomorrow with nothing scheduled, so I'll try to get back to you tomorrow if
Okay.
you email
So send
me.
all your emails right now and get those
Yes.
questions answered. Thank you so much. Thank you for the great discount. Let's drop that one more time just in case people missed that.
And let me just, I'm sorry, I got my links right here. And I think I put it on there, and I'm just gonna put, here we go. These are the links. You can book a call with me for a couple weeks out, or if you need to talk to somebody right now, I have Michelle's booking calendar there and in the workbook I can send you as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This was great. I really enjoyed I love talking about audiobooks and changes in technology and new trends and new things that are happening. I think, the coolest thing about the publishing industry is how much it's growing and changing and new opportunities and new fun things to help us get our books into the world. So thank you so much. And everyone,
Yeah.
thank you for being here with us today. Any last words as we wrap this up?
No, I just I agree with you, Alexa. I will talk about audio all day long, and I love new technology. And if we take out all the scary parts of AI with deep fakes and stuff, I think it's absolutely beautiful and is really helping my production. And audio is moving to a really, really cool place. So I'm excited. What cautiously optimistic about the audio future, I think is a good way to put it.
I
And
love
thanks
it.
everybody for showing up, and thanks Alexa for all the work you and Women in Publishing do for the world of books and audio.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone, have a great day and we will see you soon. Bye.